September 1st, 1943. Rabaul airfield throbs under tropical heat as Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai leans over an intelligence sheet, his one good eye skimming a rumor that sounds like a joke. A new American fighter, fat as a bomber, heavy as bad design. They call it the F6F Hellcat. Outside the tent, A6M Zeros sit nose to wind on pierced steel planking. White sun discs, bright against sea blue sky, sleek, obedient, the pride of 2 triumphant years. Laughter rises an airplane twice. Our weight can't turn. Armor is dead weight. Radios are for cowards. Yet the camera lingers on the numbers inked on that paper, horsepower, ammo load. Armor plate details that whisper of a different kind of fight. In 30 days, the joke will curdle. In 6 months, the math of the Pacific will be rewritten in smoke and contrails. To understand that laughter, you have to remember what victory looked like for Japan in 1941 and 1942. At Pearl Harbor, 29 aircraft lost versus 347 destroyed. In the Philippines, 7 losses against 103 kills. Over Darwin, 2-30. For 2 years, the Zero reigned supreme across the Pacific sky. Allied pilots spoke of it with awe and dread, an airplane that could outclimb, outturn, and outrange anything they flew. When a captured Zero was test-flown in the U.S. in 1942, American engineers refused to believe their own data. A fighter that could fly 200 miles, climb like a falcon, and twist tighter than a biplane. It defied logic. But that miracle came with a hidden cost: no armor, no self-sealing tanks. Sometimes not even a radio, every pound sacrificed for agility. The Zero was a thoroughbred, exquisite and fragile, built for a war Japan could not afford to lose. Inside the combined fleet headquarters, the air smelled of ink and cigarette smoke as staff officers bent over a new intelligence report. Through neutral Swedish channels came technical details of America's latest carrier fighter, the F6F Hellcat. 12,000 pounds loaded weight, 6 50 caliber machine guns, armor plate everywhere, self-sealing tanks. To Japanese tacticians raised on the gospel of lightness, this sounded like madness. Captain Minoru Genda, architect of Pearl Harbor, studied the numbers and smiled faintly. "They have learned nothing," he said. "A Zero will fly circles around it." And by their math, he was right. But beneath that calm arithmetic lurked a truth neither side yet grasped. Wars are not won by elegance, but by endurance. History often turns in such quiet rooms, men certain they understand the future, while it's already changing outside their walls. Before we move on, tell me, where are you watching from? What's your take? Was Japan's faith in agility an act of brilliance, or the first crack in its air power doctrine? Let's see what history means to you. September 30th, 1943. Marcus Island, Petty Officer First Class. Yoshio Fukui flew escort for a reconnaissance plane when 6 dark blue shapes rose from the southeast. At first glance, he thought they were B-25 bombers on an odd heading. Then they turned, and his gut tightened. One engine, thick fuselage wings too short for the body. It looked wrong, yet menacing. Fukui dived first, confident in the Zero's legendary turn rate. He would swing behind the slow American brute, pour in a burst, and be gone. But the Hellcat didn't play by those rules. It went vertical, straight up, climbing on raw horsepower. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp roared like a storm, dragging the F6F into a sky where the Zero gasped for air. At 15,000 feet, the Hellcat pivoted in a perfect hammerhead and dropped back down, guns blazing. 17 hits in 3 seconds. Fukui barely survived. His wingman did not. The first real encounter ended not in triumph, but confusion. For the first time, Japanese pilots whispered, "What if weight is not weakness?" October 5th, 1943, over Wake Island. Lieutenant Yoshio Shiga led 12 Zeros from the 252nd Air Group to intercept another expected nuisance raid. They climbed high, 20,000 feet sun, at their backs, certain of victory. Below, 12 F6F Hellcats cruised in disciplined formations, 3 divisions wide, spacing slow, deliberate. Shiga's pilots rolled into their dives, tracers flashing toward the blue shapes that by all logic should break apart and flee. But the Hellcats didn't scatter. They absorbed the hit's armor and self-sealing tanks doing their quiet work, then counterattacked with terrifying precision. Instead of turning to dogfight, they climbed using gravity and altitude as weapons. The Zero's engine struggled for oxygen where the Hellcats still had power to spare. One by one, Japanese fighters fell burning through clouds they had once ruled. Shiga's diary would later record the moment simply, "We dove as hawks. They returned as thunder. 8 Zeros lost. No Hellcats downed." In that battle silence, a doctrine shattered. The age of the turning fight was ending. November 11th, 1943. Rabaul. The humid air hung heavy in the briefing hut as Lieutenant Commander Tetsuzo Tanamizu addressed a room of weary, anxious faces. He had survived 3 encounters with the new American fighter, more than most could claim. Chalk squeaked against the board as he drew 2 arcs, one steep, one wide. "Forget everything you know," he told them quietly. "The Americans have changed the rules." He explained the concept now haunting Japanese squadrons: energy fighting. The Hellcat didn't outturn the Zero, it didn't need to. It attacked in slashing dives, traded speed for altitude, then returned from above before the Zero could react. And those radios the Japanese once mocked for adding weight, they were now the invisible weapon. "They fight as one," Tanamizu said. "We fight as individuals. They are machines. We are samurai." Outside, engines coughed to life, the sky vibrating with purpose. Inside, silence. No one argued because somewhere deep down, every pilot knew he had just heard the truth. December 1943. Truck Lagoon. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, once the proud leader of the Pearl Harbor attack, now walked among the wrecks of returning aircraft. Zeros that had limped home from combat with Hellcats told a grim story written in bullet holes. The disparity in firepower was no longer theoretical. It was arithmetic. 6 Browning M2.50 caliber guns on the Hellcat spat 400 or 500 rounds per minute. Each bullet carried almost 5 times the impact energy of a Zero's lighter 7.7mm round. Armor plates shielded the pilot. Self-sealing tanks kept planes alive, even when riddled with fire. But the worst revelation wasn't in the metal, it was invisible. American fighters were now guided by radar. Hellcat pilots didn't search for their prey. They were directed to it by voices from ships miles away, men who could see through clouds and darkness. Japanese pilots still relied on their eyes. As Fuchida listened to reports, he realized the Americans weren't just building better airplanes. They were building a way to see the war itself. By early 1944, Japan's greatest weapon, its pilots, was vanishing faster than its planes. Before the war, the Imperial Navy's flight training was a masterpiece of discipline 3 years long, 700 flight hours, endless gunnery, and aerobatics. Graduates were artists in the sky trained to fight as if each battle were a personal duel. But by 1944, fuel shortages and time desperation rewrote the syllabus. New pilots went to war with barely 200 hours in the air, many having never fired their guns in flight. At Kasumigara Naval Air Station, Lieutenant Commander Yoshihiro Hashimoto wrote bleakly, "We are sending children to fight professionals." Across the Pacific, those professionals were American trainees completing 300-hour programs that included radio coordination instrument flying and mock carrier landings until instinct replaced fear. One Japanese ensign flying his first mission over Truk lasted only 7 minutes. His gunnery instructor later said he had never missed a target on paper. Training had become arithmetic too, and Japan was running out of numbers. October 1944. The Battle of Formosa. Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukudome committed nearly every remaining aircraft to repel the relentless American carrier raids. 700 planes roared skyward, and the radio waves filled with triumph. Japanese reports spoke of great victories. 26 enemy carriers sunk, hundreds of aircraft destroyed. But when the surviving pilots returned and the gun camera film was developed, the truth struck like a blade. Real American losses were fewer than 100 aircraft. Japan had lost over 300. The deception wasn't deliberate. It was denial, a desperate belief that courage could still outweigh technology. Lieutenant Sadaki Akamatsu, one of the few veterans to survive later, wrote, "At every altitude they were waiting. Above us, below us, everywhere." The sky itself had been divided and assigned. It wasn't a battle anymore. It was extermination by system, each Hellcat guided, positioned, and reinforced by a network of control and production that Japan could no longer match. The Empire's wings were breaking not from cowardice, but from exhaustion. June 19th, 1944. The Philippine Sea. Dawn rose over the carriers of Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's mobile fleet, their decks alive with hope and noise. 9 carriers, 450 aircraft, the decisive battle Japan had promised since Midway. Across the horizon waited Task Force 5815 American carriers, nearly 1,000 aircraft, half of them F6F Hellcats. When American radar detected incoming strikes 150 miles out, controllers aboard the USS Lexington and USS Essex vectored squadrons into perfect interception. Hellcats climbed through stacked layers of cloud, each division precisely positioned by unseen hands. At 20,000 feet, Lieutenant Zenji Abe saw them 60 blue fighters, spread like a steel curtain, sunlight flashing on canopies. The first wave lasted 12 minutes. High side passes controlled bursts, zoom climbs back to safety. Zeros tried to turn and stalled. Torpedo bombers dove and vanished in flame. Commander David McCampbell of Air Group 15 claimed 7 kills that morning, his wingman Roy rushing 6 more. The battle had become geometry cold, exact, and fatal. When the guns finally fell silent over the Philippine Sea, the outcome was beyond precedent. Japan had lost 346 carrier aircraft and another 50 land-based planes. The U.S. Navy, in return, lost only 30 aircraft from all causes, some to accidents, not enemy fire. In the ready rooms that night, exhausted pilots joked darkly that the day had felt like a turkey shoot. The phrase stuck, echoing across decades, as shorthand for overwhelming superiority. But the laughter was uneasy. American aviators understood what those burning dots in the sea really were, human beings who had fought as bravely as any in history. The real story wasn't glory, it was imbalance. Japan's carriers now floated nearly empty, their flight deck symbols without sting. Above that same dark ocean, the Hellcat silhouette no longer represented a single fighter. It had become something larger, a flying embodiment of industrial war, where logistics, radar, and training merged into one unstoppable machine. October 24th, 1944. Leyte, Gulf. Commander David McCampbell launched with 7 Hellcats from the USS Essex into a dawn sky streaked with gold. Radar reported 60 Japanese aircraft, inbound bombers, and fighters converging on the American fleet. "We'll take them all," McCampbell said calmly over the radio. For the next 90 minutes, the Pacific became his canvas. Each dive, each climb was textbook precision. McCampbell's tracers found their marks: 5 zeros, 4 bombers, 9 kills before his guns clicked empty. His wingman, Lieutenant Roy, rushing downed 6 more. When the last enemy turned away, not a single Hellcat bore a bullet hole. 7 fighters had defeated 60. Back aboard the carrier, mechanics counted holes in the deck from shell casings, not enemy fire. McCampbell's record that day earned him the Medal of Honor. But more than that, it proved a transformation. Air combat was no longer a contest of nerves and reflexes. It was the execution of a system that left nothing to chance. In the aftermath of the Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf, Japan's surviving aviators carried something heavier than defeat Hellcat psychosis, as later analysts would call it. Pilots returning from combat spoke of enemy formations that seemed to appear from nowhere, perfectly aligned, striking without warning. "It was as if we fought ghosts directed by the gods," one survivor wrote. Admiral Ozawa's own report admitted the truth. Each Hellcat is not a pilot, but a component of a single machine. Japanese command tried to rebuild, but the pipeline was empty. By early 1945, new Navy pilots graduated with barely 50 flight hours. Army aviators with 60. Some learned gunnery with only 50 live rounds total. When conventional combat became suicide, the arithmetic turned grim. If a Zero attacked and died, nothing changed. But if a pilot became the weapon crashing deliberately, the odds of success they calculated rose to 30%. That cold, desperate logic gave birth to the kamikaze. April to June 1945. Okinawa. The skies above the invasion fleet churned with fire. Nearly 2,000 kamikaze sorties hurled themselves at the American Armada, desperate to turn the tide one last time. Against them, Hellcats stood as the shield of the fleet. Lieutenant Eugene Valencia and his flying circus led the defense, flying four-plane formations so tight and precise, they called them the mowing machine. "We swept through them like harvesters," Valencia later said. Each pilot covered his sector one pass climb reset. It was cold efficiency, born of necessity. For every kamikaze that slipped through, dozens were cut down before reaching the ships. The numbers tell the truth. Hellcats flew 38,000 combat sorties during the Okinawa campaign, claiming 351 victories for 249 losses, a kill ratio of 9.5 to 1. Yet even victory had a cost. Pilots returned trembling, haunted by what they'd seen: men turning themselves into weapon skies filled with flame. No triumph could wash away that sight. By 1945, the Hellcat had evolved into something even more formidable. The F6F variant carried water injection that boosted its Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine to over 2,200 horsepower. Zero-length rocket launchers turned it into a strike fighter, while improved armor and the K-14 computing gun sight allowed pilots to aim by physics, not instinct, calculating deflection automatically in the split second before firing. Across the ocean, Japan struggled to keep its planes flying. Nakajima Sakai engines had to be hand-fitted, no two exactly alike. Replacement parts were scarce, factories bombed, quality crumbling under strain. Even Saburo Sakai, Japan's most respected ace, nearly died in his first encounter with Hellcats. "I tried every maneuver I had mastered," he later wrote. Rolls, loops, dives. The Hellcat followed easily, as if amused. He survived only because his opponent forgot to jettison his drop tank. It was the smallest of human errors and proof that even the finest pilot could no longer bridge the technological abyss yawning beneath his wings. By the war's end, the numbers told a story more devastating than any single battle. F6F Hellcats had destroyed 5,223 enemy aircraft in aerial combat, while losing only 270 to enemy fighters, a staggering 19-to-1 kill ratio. They produced 305 U.S. Navy aces and accounted for roughly 75% of all Navy air-to-air victories. But behind those numbers were faces, names, and the quiet exhaustion of men who'd seen too much. On the other side of the ledger, Japan's toll was almost total. Of the 18,000 naval aviators who had taken to the skies since 1941, fewer than 100 combat-experienced pilots remained alive by August 1945. The rest were gone, lost in fire, sea, or silence. Statistics became gravestones in the air. A squadron roster was an obituary list written in pencil. The Hellcat's success wasn't merely mechanical. It was the visible result of a nation that could train, fuel, and protect its warriors long after its enemy could not. October 1944. The kamikaze becomes doctrine. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, architect of the program, put it bluntly: "A Zero attacking normally has almost no chance. As a bomb, it has 30%. Cold arithmetic wrapped in patriotism born of despair." Lieutenant Yukio Seki led the first official mission, 5 aircraft, diving onto the American carrier St. Lo, sinking it in a fireball of fuel and courage. Escorting him that day was Japan's greatest ace, Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, who claimed 2 Hellcats in the chaos, his 86th and 87th victories. The next morning, October 26th, Nishizawa boarded a transport to return to base. It was intercepted by Hellcats from VF-14. None aboard survived. The irony was merciless. The man who had once ruled the Pacific sky died unarmed, brought down by the very aircraft that symbolized the shift from valor to system. Individual mastery, the soul of the Zero, had been replaced by the machinery of inevitability. August 15th, 1945. At Sugi Airfield. The war's final day began not with battle, but with silence. Japanese pilots, many barely 18, gathered around a small radio as Emperor Hirohito's voice, distant and trembling, announced surrender. For a moment, no one moved. Some wept. Others simply stared at their hands, the tools of a craft that no longer had meaning. Among them sat Captain Minoru Genda, the strategist who once mocked the Hellcat as a flying brick. Now he looked across a field of grounded aircraft machines without fuel parts or purpose. Across the Pacific at that same hour, Lieutenant Clarence Moore of VF-31 shot down a Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bomber that hadn't received the surrender order. 2 short bursts ended the Pacific Air War. It was 2:00 p.m., the last aerial kill of World War II. The noise of engines faded. The empire of the rising sun had fallen into shadow, and for the men who survived the hardest part, began learning how to live again. September 1945. At Sugi Airfield again, but now under a pale peace. The first American aircraft to land after Japan's surrender were 12 F6F Hellcats from the USS Yorktown. Japanese mechanics, pilots, and cadets lined the runway, silent, curious. They had faced these machines for 2 years in terror and disbelief. Now they could touch them. Lieutenant Robert Bob Vause, an American ace with 19 victories, taxied his Hellcat to a halt and climbed down, smiling gently. Through an interpreter, he offered to demonstrate. Before their eyes, he looped, rolled, and climbed in easy grace, the big fighter moving with the confidence of a veteran athlete. "You have to understand," he told them afterward, resting a hand on the cowling, "this isn't even full power. In combat, it's 20% stronger." Japanese engineers examined the rivets, the armor plating the engine mounts. For the first time, admiration replaced resentment. The war had ended, but a lesson in engineering discipline and humility had just begun. In the months that followed, Japanese engineers began to study the Hellcat in detail. They dismantled one piece by piece, tracing the logic of a machine built for endurance rather than elegance. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 Engine 2 884 precision machine parts, every one interchangeable, stood as a monument to industrial discipline. By contrast, the Nakajima Sake engine required hand-fitting. No two were quite the same. Professor Jiro Horikoshi, designer of the Zero, examined the Hellcat's blueprints with a quiet respect only an engineer could feel. "We designed an aircraft for 1941, he wrote later. They designed an aircraft system for 1945. His words cut deeper than defeat. They revealed the truth of an era. The Hellcat was not just a fighter. It was a philosophy of manufacturing. Every bolt, every plate, every duplicated part represented reliability, and reliability multiplied across thousands of planes became invincibility. In the modern age, standardization was strategy. Across the ocean, the factory became the true battlefield. At Grumman's Bethpage plant in New York, the lights never went out. 3 shifts worked around the clock 7 days a week. At peak production, a new Hellcat rolled off the line every 60 minutes, 24 aircraft a day. In 30 months, they built 5 of them. Every worker, from the engineers to the women riveting wings, knew their craft was saving lives thousands of miles away. Color-coded assembly guides, standardized jigs, and interchangeable components turned complex manufacturing into a rhythm of precision. Inspectors walked the floor with clipboards and coffee, ensuring that speed never meant carelessness. By contrast, Japan's industry, bombed, blockaded, starved of materials, managed just over 5,000 fighters in all of 1944. The difference was more than numbers. It was momentum. America had turned war into production, and production into strategy. The Hellcat wasn't merely built to win, it was mass-produced to end the war. Before the Hellcat naval doctrine was simple, whoever struck first lived. Carriers were glass cannons, deadly but fragile. The F6F changed that forever. Its range, toughness, and sheer numbers turned U.S. carriers into floating fortresses. Admiral Mark Mitcher, commander of Task Force 58, understood it immediately. With the Hellcat, he said, "We don't have to find them first. Let them come. We'll destroy them when they do." The shift was revolutionary. Radar-guided Hellcat patrols created an aerial shield so thick that enemy bombers rarely broke through. American carriers could now linger off enemy coasts for weeks, launching strikes, absorbing counterattacks, and returning to the fight the next morning. Strategy itself transformed. Offense no longer depended on luck or surprise, but on sustained presence. The Pacific had become a chessboard, and the Hellcat its queen, powerful, patient, unflinching. The age of the vulnerable carrier was over. The age of dominance from the sea had begun. Beyond technology, the Hellcat represented a clash of philosophies. Japanese pilots raised under Bushido saw combat as a personal duel, a test of spirit and honor. The idea of breaking off a losing fight was unthinkable. For Hellcat pilots, it was doctrine. Energy fighting meant climbing away, resetting, surviving to strike again. Prudence wasn't cowardice, it was responsibility. In Japanese culture, radios had once been seen as distractions from instinct. In American squadrons, they were lifelines. Team tactics replaced individual heroics. One pilot's voice could save 6 others, turning isolated fights into coordinated strikes. Even when some Japanese units began to adapt, experimenting with night fighter tactics, ambush formations, the change came too late. Doctrine was destiny. The war had become not just a battle of machines, but of mindsets. The Hellcat didn't just outfly its opponents, it outlived their philosophy. In the modern sky, survival itself had become the highest form of discipline. Tokyo, 1962, a symposium on Pacific War aviation. American and Japanese veterans gathered in quiet camaraderie, gray-haired men who had once tried to kill each other, now trading memories over cups of tea. Captain David McCampbell, still modest despite his 34 aerial victories, spoke first. The Hellcat won the Pacific Air War, he said simply. It was reliable, forgiving, and built to bring its pilots home. Across the table, Saburo Sakai nodded. The Zero, he replied, was a superior fighter. The Hellcat was a superior weapon system. We never understood that difference until it was too late. Their exchange captured the war's final truth. The side that unified machine doctrine and industry would always prevail over one that glorified the individual. Skill and courage still mattered, but only when multiplied by a system designed to preserve them. Around the room, silence lingered, respectful, reflective, without bitterness. The war was history, but its lessons endured. And so we return to that humid tent at Rabaul, September 1943, where Saburo Sakai once laughed at the rumor of an overweight American fighter. He couldn't have known that every extra pound on the Hellcat meant something: armor for its pilot radios, for coordination fuel, for reach ammunition, for endurance. Each ounce was a promise that its pilot would live to fight again. The Zero had been a masterpiece of purity, but purity is fragile. The Hellcat was a masterpiece of compromise, strong, adaptable, and brutally efficient. It didn't just defeat Japan's Air Force. It dismantled an entire philosophy that valued grace over survivability. Today, when a Hellcat and a Zero sit side by side in a museum hangar, they no longer represent enemies but eras, one fading into the other. The Zero asked its pilots to be perfect. The Hellcat allowed them to be human. And in the end, that was the difference between brilliance and endurance. When I tell these stories, I'm reminded that behind every statistic was someone's heartbeat: pilot, or mechanic, victor, or vanquished. The Hellcat and the Zero weren't just machines. They were reflections of the people who built them and the worlds they came from. What do you see when you look back at that sky?